Hey there, kindergarten. So, I don't know when you all became a master of pattern and color, but last week your artwork was incredible, and I can't wait to see how you'll use that in this week's lesson because last week I was so impressed by all of you, and I'm really proud of the work that you're doing. Even just using markers and crayons, you guys have been all doing such a beautiful job. So definitely keep that up. And I hope that I can see that in your next piece, where we'll be using our kind of mixture of portraits, like we did a little while ago, and our pattern, like we did last week. And we're going to mush them into a Klimt style quilt kind of portrait drawing. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about who Gustav Klimt is, and then we'll start our art piece. Now, the next three pieces are examples of the artwork done by Gustav Klimt, and Gustav loved pattern. He would repeat lines, shapes, and colors in a variety of different ways to create these bold, vibrant pieces of artwork that you see in front of you. He used golds and yellows and browns to really create the idea of this warm, inviting painting. And our goal is to do something similar for our drawings, except we're going to be drawing ourselves in quilts that are done in a Gustav fashion. So we'll be using your knowledge of portraits and patterns and colors to create these beautiful drawings or paintings that you see in front of you. So let's go ahead and start with the steps on how to draw ourselves in these beautiful quilts, how to go about drawing our patterns like we've done in the past, and then we'll talk a little bit about coloring them as well this week. Now this week you can actually choose if you'd like to stick with just marker and crayon, you can, or you can use crayon and watercolor paint. I'll be doing both for you, so you can see an example of what both look like and how to go about the process of both of them. But then when it comes down to the actual coloring, it'll be up to you and your family on how you'd like to go about this drawing. But of course, before we get into the coloring part of it, we have to talk about how to draw our little self people in a quilt. So of course, I'm starting with a head, and I'm just doing a very, not too small, but pretty small circle at the top of my paper, leaving the whole bottom of the paper for the quilt and all of the patterns that we'll be drawing later. Now what I went ahead and did, I drew my head and I drew a little bit of hair around the head, and then I'll add some details. I'm making it look a little bit about myself, a little bit like myself right now. It doesn't have to look perfect or exactly like me. Later on, I actually color it a little bit differently, so it's up to you if you'd like to make it a self-portrait. But I think it might be fun for you guys to do portraits as well inside of these. So I had long hair. In the next one that I'll show you, I actually did shorter hair, which could be seen for boys or for someone with shorter hair. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create kind of like the hood of my quilt. So imagine like you've pulled the blanket up over your head and you're wearing it like a hood. That's what we're going to be drawing. So your person looks like they're snuggled in the quilt really, really well. Then I'm drawing these kind of wavy lines off of the head of my character down off the paper. So not going all the way down, just going directly off the paper. And I'm just using like kind of squiggly lines, right? Not straight, they don't have to be perfect. And throughout my entire quilt pattern, I'm going to be using these kind of swiggle lines to create the little sections of quilts. And if you've ever seen a quilt, it actually is just a big blanket with kind of like patches of different patterns on them. And actually, pause for a second, I'll pull one up for you. So we are just creating those patches. Now in the image that I provided for you, they have more just square ones, but that's not fun. So let's do some nice swiggles all around our paper. Now you want bigger ones because if you do them too small, please remember that it'll be difficult to fill those spots in with patterns because you want to fill up the whole thing with a bunch of beautiful patterns. Alright, So I have my little person. She is tucked nice and snugly inside of her quilt. Now I'm going to go ahead and start adding pattern to my quilts. And before I do that, I'm going to take a black marker and I'm just going to trace over every line with this black marker. Now our quilt is a bunch of different pieces of fabric sewn together, so it could be fun to add some of the stitch marks from the corners of our quilt that's being sewn together. So the fabric would naturally have little stitches on each section. So I'm just adding those little lines to represent the stitching with my black marker, and I'm just going directly in and adding those with the black marker. You don't need to use pencil for this because it's not anything that's a big deal if you happen to mess up, but you don't need a lot of them either. You can just add a few throughout your piece. So now we are moving on to coloring our little portraits in our little quilts. Now from here you can choose if you have crayons and markers and you'd like to just use crayons and markers, you can continue watching here. If you have crayons and watercolor paint and you would like to paint your piece, you can move to the time that I've actually designated in the video. So I will show you where to skip to if you would like to paint and use crayon, but if you are just using markers and crayons, you can continue watching here. So now let's get to the fun part, and we're going to start adding some patterns in the quilt pieces themselves. And for this, I am going to be using markers. Now I'm just using generic dollar store markers, so they don't have to be anything fancy. And I am just going to very slowly, I'm going to add, and I'm going to take my time, some beautiful patterns throughout the entire piece where I see a quilt. Now remember, a pattern is a repeating line or shape over and over and over again. So for example, I'm using some squiggly lines, and I am just doing that same squiggle over and over and over again until I get to the end of this piece of quilt. Then I'm going to jump to a different color, and I'm going to go ahead and do a different pattern in the next piece of quilt. And patterns can also be shapes that repeat inside of one another over and over and over again. So I'm just doing circles over and over and over again until we finish the entire piece of quilt. And I am going to do this for the remainder of this piece. I'm going to actually fast forward so I don't bore you with my patterns. And you can choose to do whatever patterns you'd like to. You do not have to do the ones that I use. You can choose whatever patterns you would like to create. Please remember, you're not scrabbling here. You are intentionally choosing what patterns to do, and you are taking your time on how to do them. Now that I'm done with my patterns, I am going to go through and very neatly color each section of quilt with a nice bright colored crayon. And remember, I'm not pushing hard with my crayons. I am pushing actually rather lightly so that the patterns behind my crayons can be seen. So I'm taking my time, I'm coloring in one direction, not scrabbling because we're too old for that, right? And you can still see that pattern behind my orange crayon actually really start to pop out. So in a lot of cases, you'll notice that the crayon actually enhances the color behind there and the pattern, and it makes it really vibrant and start to pop out. Again, I would suggest using brighter colored crayons. So I wouldn't be using black or any dark blues or anything too dark. And if you do, just make sure that you push lightly with your crayons so it doesn't overpower the marker underneath. And again, I'll let you choose what colors you would like to use. I am going to fast forward so I don't bore you with my coloring. And you can always go back to a section if you need help again and pause the video. And in mine, I actually don't go ahead and I don't color the background, but you can color the background if you'd like to. I would actually suggest that you do. It just makes the whole piece kind of come together. So take your time, have fun, and enjoy creating your little character in his or her little quilt.